Well, welcome to our website on building resilience with body weight exercise for both beginners and people who are well beyond a beginner level. I'm Karen Whalen. I'm the host of today's webinar. Today's webinar will be facilitated by our very own Wes Pomarensky. He's worked at the Wellness Institute for several years now, and he's our kinesiologist here. Wes really firmly believes in building a solid foundation of movement and physical literacy on which various fitness and athletic goals can be achieved. So he's worked with various populations ranging from people who are dealing with chronic disease to injured workers, as well as high school athletes. So he has a plethora of experience with a wide array of folks. So he also has a number of years as a high performance coach for Baseball Manitoba too. So he's really well suited to talk to you today about this subject. Just to give you a little bit of quick background on the wellness, there's our picture in the summertime. We've been around for about 20 years. We're a not-for-profit certified medical fitness facility here in Winnipeg. And we focus on through a variety of programs and services, and through our personalized fitness programs, our nutrition and lifestyle change programs. Our goal is to help prevent illness and improve quality of life through our outcomes that we hope people achieve. If you have any questions through our webinar today while you're listening, if you could kindly put them in your chat box, if many of you have tried that out already, at any time during our presentation, and we'll address them at the end just to keep the flow of the webinar moving. So I'll pass things over to Wes now, who will begin. And again, use your chat box if you have any questions. Thanks. Here's Wes.
All right, hello. Thanks for joining us today, everybody. As Karen mentioned, my name's Wes, and I'll be taking us through our webinar today, again titled Building Resilience with Body Weight Exercises for Beginners and Beyond. And again, our goal today is to make sure that no matter what your fitness level is that you can take something out of today's webinar that will improve your exercise and help improve your fitness long term. The first question is why do we want to start with body weight? So if you're a beginner, using body weight styled exercises helps you learn some movement principles in a very low risk environment. Common thing that I've heard from many people is that when they first come to a gym setting, seeing equipment such as machines or free weights like barbells, kettlebells, free weights, whatever it may be, it's a little bit of a daunting task sometimes to take all that in and try to learn to use. Starting with body weight exercise, you're only using your own body, of course, so there's no other concern about am I using these types of tools or implements properly. With body weight exercise, it's also useful to help break down the main components of exercises, of more complex exercises, into manageable bite-sized pieces. Again, this creates an ideal learning environment just because it's a low risk and a safe place to begin to learn how to improve your fitness levels. By focusing on exercises with body weight, and again today, although they may seem simple, they may not be in the long run, we set an ideal foundation that hopefully gives somebody later on greater confidence with movements or exercises that may be more complex or more challenging or use different tools. The goal is that this confidence allows you to feel ready to try exercises that when you first see them, they may seem difficult, they may seem kind of scary, but in the end, it's something that you feel confident in wanting to try. That being said, again, this is not just for beginners. If you're someone who's experienced, you can still benefit from using the following exercises in your routine. Oftentimes, it's helpful to revisit the basics. Again, even though exercises may not seem too hard, there's always something that you can help focus on that is going to eventually help other more complex exercises. It can help improve some weaknesses. Again, oftentimes when we see things that don't necessarily seem hard, but when we try them, they are. It can kind of expose things that, if improved, can only help your other fitness goals. Additionally, for people who are experienced in doing a lot more complex exercises as the main part of their exercise routine, maybe what you learn here can be a part of a good warm-up that prepares you for the rest of that. And then last but not least, some people really like to what I call go deep into body weight strength. So there are a vast array of exercises that we can make extremely challenging using just your own body weight. We may touch on some of those later, but hopefully that sets the foundation here for what you guys are going to experience in this webinar. And again, I hope that no matter what fitness level you are, you can learn something today. So before we get to the exercises, we always like to touch on principles. These principles of strength, or principles of building strength, are things that we want to focus on while we're performing these exercises. I want to talk about that third line first. What you see there says deliberate practice is greater than working out. What we mean by that is that in order to learn how to do something, we have to make sure that we focus on it, we repeat it. Again, it may take some patience, but we have to commit to focusing through those exercises. When we're working out and not necessarily thinking about what our body's doing, maybe it burns calories in the short term, but long term, you may not be learning the proper technique, you may not be learning the proper way to focus on that. So if we can be very in depth in what we're doing and really thinking about how we're performing everything, what you'll find is that in the long term, you might improve to a greater degree, and you will still be getting a workout in the short term. It's not that you're getting nothing of it. You're just, by focusing, getting twice the benefit of doing it rather than simply just going through the motions. Finally, if I revert back to the top point for a moment, proximal stability for distal mobility. This is a very, very fancy way of saying that in order to do something with a lot of strength, we need our torso or our core, whatever term you'd like to use, we need our torso to be very strong, like a strong pillar of block, while the arms and legs move. If your core muscles are not functioning to their best degree, you're going to find that you're going to have a more difficult time doing some exercises. So a lot of our things that we're going to focus on today help promote this principle that's going to allow for more complex type of exercises later on. An easy example or easy visual to think of would be when doing a push-up, even though when the arms are moving, so that would be the distal part of your body, your arms, the proximal part, which is your torso, wants to remain still. We don't want our torso moving like a wet noodle during our push-up. We want it to be nice and strong while the arms are doing most of the work in terms of pushing. One of the biggest benefits we get from strength, and one of the quotes I like to use a lot, is that strength solves many of life's problems. The stronger you are, the easier other things are, right? And if you're stronger, you're more likely to be active, because being active is not going to be difficult to do. One of the stories I always like to say is that if there's something on the ground and that object on the ground weighs 50 pounds, and the maximum capacity that you're able to lift is 50 pounds, then having to lift up that object is going to be a 100% maximal effort. Now, if you had to do something that's 100% maximal effort all day, you're probably not going to do it very much, right? You probably wouldn't be able to do it very much. But if by incorporating some strength exercises, you can improve where now you're able to lift 100 pounds off the ground, then lifting something up, that object that's now 50 pounds is only going to be a 50% effort. So all of a sudden, you're much more likely to do that activity because it's much easier to do and much easier to do often throughout the day. So again, strength is one of those big things that if we can work on focusing, it can add a lot of benefit to your life. When we look at exercises that we want to use to build strength, we want to try to pick exercises that give us a big bang for your buck. There's lots of terms that we use for exercises. The best ones that help build strength, again, the ones that give you the most return on your investment of time and energy, are going to be what we call multi-joint or compound movements. Typically what that means is that there's multiple joints working at the same time. You may see these referred to as the fundamental human movements. They may be referred to as compound, multi-joint, but what they mean is that it's going to be using a lot of your body at the same time. I've just written down some examples here. For example, we have different pushing and pulling up exercises for the upper body, as well as a hinge and squat for the lower body. Those are just examples. Again, there's a few other categories as well. Again, those exercises being a little more complex are what I want to teach today in terms of building up to those exercises. So we're going to touch on some of those later on in our webinar, but what we're going to talk about the most today is what I call the building blocks exercises. So the things I'm going to talk about and spend the majority of my time on today are the skills that provide the basis for making those more complex multi-joint exercises a little bit easier, and you'll get a little bit more benefit when you do them. One thing I have to talk about before we get to our exercise examples is the concept of applying tension. So tension is something that is required when we're lifting weights. So whether it's your body, that is the weight, whether it's free weights, again, whether it be barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, doesn't matter. Your body needs to be able to tense up in order to lift something. The greater the difficulty, so if it's more weights or it's just a different body position, the greater tension needed. The goal in choosing exercises is to choose the proper challenge. By proper challenge, we mean that we don't want somebody lifting something that is beyond their capability because it's going to require a lot of tension. If you have any sort of issues with chronic issues like blood pressure, high blood pressure or high heart rates, it's always good to speak with your doctor before you attempt any high tension techniques. We're not going to be talking about anything with excessive tension today, although again, any type of lifting weights or lifting your body in general is going to require some tension. My goal is to properly teach things today that again are going to be safe and effective for the everyday person. Although again, I can't stress enough, if you do have any chronic issues, it's always best to speak with your doctor before you start any exercise program for the first time. One of the things that is going to be touched on a lot today is proper breathing. When we talk about tension, when we hold our breath, if everybody would hold their breath right now, you would know that you're going to feel your body tense up. So when we're lifting weights, we want to make sure that we control the breath with all of our movement. Typically, when we are performing the exertion phase of an exercise, so what that means is when we're moving against gravity, whether it's our body or whether it is with a free weight, we want to do a controlled breath out. And as you can see, I've put no breath holding with an exclamation mark here. We know that holding your breath, again, just increases that tension. So again, we want to keep the proper challenge. We're going to make sure we do a controlled breath out with a lot of our activities here. So with that being said, hopefully that again gives you a little bit of a background of what we're going to be doing. I'd like to now move into our first exercise that we're going to talk about. And it doesn't seem like an exercise, but it can be. It's called diaphragmatic breathing. Essentially what this means is we want to make sure that we have our proper breathing during all exercises. I mentioned that in order to keep our torso nice and strong, we want to have our body in an ideal setup to be able to achieve that core stiffness, that torso stiffness that we desire. Anytime you take a good breath, you should be able to use your diaphragm. On the right, we just have a picture here of an A and a B. What you see on the picture A is that the diaphragm is that green muscle you see on the top. And then we have what's called the pelvic floor on the bottom. When you have these muscles facing each other, you're going to get ideal tension in your core. In picture B, if we don't have the ideal setup, you're not going to be able to get that core stiffness to the best degrees possible. Whenever we are doing these types of diaphragmatic breathing, it's very helpful to kind of use certain body positions to help practice this. I'm going to skip ahead for a moment before coming back and show you a picture of myself lying down on my back. My feet are on the chair. So my feet are resting on the chair. I'm not supporting I'm not holding my feet in the air. They are completely rested there. So if you do have a chair like this, by elevating the legs and resting them on the chair, you can keep your back flat on the ground. What you're going to do is you put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. One of the ways that we know if someone is using their diaphragm to breathe rather than their upper chest muscles is by taking in 5 breaths. So if you're sitting in a chair watching this, you can still perform this sitting in a chair. Lying down is not totally necessary. But what I want you to do is place one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly. I'm going to get you to take 5 breaths in and out. So I'm going to pause for a moment while you all take those breaths. So typically what you may notice is that you may feel one hand that moves more than the other hand. If the hand on your belly button is where you feel that breath going in and out the most, then that's kind of where we want it to be. If the hand is on your chest, all that means is that you may not be using your diaphragm or your breathing muscles as good as we could be. So that's something we can improve. I'm going to skip back for a moment just so I can talk about here. When I teach somebody to see if they're using their diaphragm effectively, I always use the term what we call 360-degree breathing. What that means is that when I take my breath in, not only do I feel that belly button second exercise here is called a dead bug. So what the dead bug is it's a way to challenge our body on how to maintain some stiffness while we're moving our arms and legs. So we're taking the principle that we just learned of getting that nice breath deep in the belly to create that stiffness, and now, again, adding that arm and leg movement. So what you see here is you see myself lying on my back. I now have my feet in the air, so I'm now not supported with any chair. I have my arms up in front of me, so it's going to take a little bit of tension already just to hold my feet up in the air. I'm going to play this video, and what you see is that leg go out and then come back in. So that arm is now going to go out. So this is two different variations of performing this exercise. Again, I'm going to pause. Oh, there we go. Full video, opposite arm and leg. So with that video, I've given 3 different variations of this exercise. I'm going to pause this right here because this is a great visual of what we want. What you'll notice when the arms and legs go out is that from my hips to my shoulders. So if you think of, again, your torso, as we would call it, hips to shoulders, there's no movement there. What we want is we want that entire torso to be nice and still while the arms and legs are moving. Again, why this exercise is so great is because it teaches us, again, in a low stress, low risk environment, how to keep that tension, that, again, light tension, how to keep that core stiffness while the arms and legs are moving. Where the breathing comes into play is that we mentioned earlier that we always want to breathe out on our exertion phase. So if I play the video again, I'm going to talk us through this. As my leg goes out, I'm doing a nice breath out and then breath in on the way back. So breath in, breath out. As I breathe out, you see that core stays still, arms move. And again, now a challenging variation on the breath out. Again, you're seeing a stiff torso, arms and legs moving. So what we're teaching here is, again, how to breathe on exertion, but also how to maintain that tension that's going to be so important as we go on. This dead bug is, if anyone has ever worked with me, they're going to know this exercise very well, because for the most part, this exercise is always going to be what I teach someone within the first 10 to 15 minutes of us beginning to show an exercise routine. I'm a really big fan of this exercise simply because of how much it can benefit you and how it can show you the proper, not only breathing pattern, but also the way to experience that core stiffness. again, in a fairly simple environment. You're lying on your back, you're not standing or anything. And again, there's no extra implements. It's a great way to kind of learn this principle that's going to apply to a much greater degree to some more complex exercises later on. Simple way to start with this exercise is just doing 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps. It's kind of a standard set and rep scheme that we'll do for this type of exercise. Again, yours between sets, you would just want to rest a minute or so, and there's lots of ways that we can adjust that, but again, a fairly simple setup in terms of sets and reps that can help you start to learn the exercise. When someone's learning for the first time, I would even say don't even worry about how many sets and reps you're doing. Just focus on, are you creating stiffness? Are you getting that breath out while you're performing it? The sets and reps can always come later once you get a feel for it. All right, so exercise number 3 is something that we call a bridge. So again, it's kind of a fairly common exercise, still performed on the back, but it's now gonna have a little bit more movement. It's kind of built off the dead bug, but now the exercise incorporates a way to teach the hips and the glutes. So your glutes being some of the strongest muscles in your body, how to contract while keeping that core stiff. So with the feet flat on the floor, what you're doing here is getting that nice breath in, and we're getting that initial tension in the abdominals. As you breathe out, what we're going to be doing is pushing our hips up to the ceiling with the goal of trying to get your hips, your knees, and shoulders in a straight line. I'm going to play this video for you, and you're going to see me push up, try to achieve that straight line from the knees, hips to shoulders, and back down. Every time I lift up my hips, what I'm doing is I am getting that nice breath out. Again, a little bit hard to see because I have that little bit of a baggy blue jacket on, but from the top of my hips all the way to my shoulders, I'm trying to make sure that that spine stays in what we call a neutral position. So neutral would mean that we're not moving, whereas the lower body, the muscles on the back side of your legs and hips are having to contract to push up. So again, the key point of this exercise is that we're adding some movement to that breathing, adding some movement to that stiffness, but really what we're doing is we're trying to teach the lower half of the body how to move while the upper body stays still. This pattern of movement, the hip pattern of going that motion while the upper body stays still, is going to be the main factor in your lower body major strength exercises. So again, those multi-joint, those compound movements that we talked about earlier, such as any hinge pattern and any squat pattern. So if you're not sure what a hinge is, essentially what the hinge means is sort of like a deadlift. So a deadlift versus a squat would be the two main pictures you could think of. The easiest way I can describe the difference between those would be if you are standing nice and tall and you imagine your head is at 12 o'clock on a clock and your feet are at 6 o'clock. When we're doing any sort of hinging or a deadlift type of movement, you want to think of your hips going back somewhere to around like 8 or 9 o'clock on the clock. So almost like a back and forth action of the hips. Whereas in the squat exercise, the hips are more going up and down. So your hips are more going to like the 6 or 7 o'clock type of spot. So again, the hinge would be a back and forth hip movement, the squat an up and down hip movement. And again, the combination of those exercises are gonna get various different muscle groups of your lower body working. And again, very beneficial in the long run. But again, the point of this one is to say that this bridge is that foundation of that movement. Can you breathe out while keeping that core stiff? Can you make sure that your spine stays neutral while you push up to the ceiling? Again, there are many ways we can challenge this exercise alone that can make it tougher. Again, I'm performing it on 2 feet on the floor, but again, there's lots of ways we could even expand this exercise to keep improving on strength before we even get to those hinge or squat patterns. But with 2 feet on the floor, it's kind of easy setup and not much to think about other than breathe out, keep that core stiff, and try to get your hips up high enough so that your knees, your hips, and your shoulders are all in a straight line. So the fourth kind of building block exercise I want to touch on is a plank. A plank can somewhat be considered as a tougher version of the dead bug. So when we roll over onto our stomach now, it's going to be a little bit of a tougher time maintaining core stiffness than when we're lying on our back. The plank is the foundation for the major upper body exercises like pushing or pulling patterns. Even though the plank is an exercise where there is no movement, the upper body and core stiffness pattern is essentially going to be something that is the basis for, again, anytime we start to add that arm movement. The plank is really, a push-up, I should say, is essentially a moving plank. The picture you see here where I have as straight as line as possible from my ankles to my hips to my shoulders, that's the position we want to keep. With this exercise, because there's no movement, we just want to focus on a nice breath in and out as we are holding that position. So the setup is done with just the forearms on the ground. You want to try to keep your forearms in a straight line. You would start with your body lying on the ground and then lift your body up off the ground. And as I mentioned, you want to keep your body in a straight line. One of the common things that we'll see in this exercise, if you have trouble maintaining that core stiffness, is that you're going to see a little bit of a dip in your lower back. So you might find that you have a big arch in that. You're not able to keep your spine in that neutral position. From there, we would just have to coach you on how to, again, keep that tension in the core while we're able to breathe in this position. Another common error that we might see is having the hips a little bit too high. So if you're not quite in a straight line, you're not going to achieve the benefit that the exercise is trying to give you. So we would try to coach you to bring the hips down. So again, it's a little bit of a tougher version of a dead bug. This would be a common way that I would progress somebody from the dead bug into these plank type of exercises. And again, they're really kind of building that foundation for those pushing and pulling upper body exercises. So if you think of the bridge and plank here, both have really set the stage for the big complex exercises that I'm going to touch on right away. This is kind of why, even if you are an experienced fitness enthusiast, by putting these exercises into your warm-up routine, we call it priming your body. You can get your body ready to perform those more complex exercises you're doing. So to bring this back around, we're going to start just by talking about lower body strength patterns of movement. We talked about the hinge and the squat as being two major movements that fitness professionals that we like to use in order to help people get stronger. I already kind of went over the difference between the pattern of movement, but again, these are exercises that we can do to improve. The hinge, again, is teaches us kind of the ideal bending technique to pick things up off the ground, whereas the squat is more kind of that up and down. Think of sitting down or returning from a chair. So this is kind of a good point to say that there are lots of ways that we can improve lower body strength within these patterns, whether it is doing it with body weight, whether it's adding different types of implements as you feel comfortable. Each way of making things tougher is going to be beneficial to you. When we think about the body weight hinge, again, even though it's an ideal way to help practice the bending technique, that hinge pattern quickly becomes fairly easy for people to perform. And with that type of exercise, we would need some form of other implements to make it tougher. The squat is something that we can usually just stick with on body weight a little bit longer because it's working more against gravity. Those hips going up and down, we can typically make the squat a lot more challenging with body weight only. The point of these exercises, and again, whether it's body weight or not, is that no tool is perfect. As I just said, the body weight hinge is great for learning, but it's not really good for, not really as helpful as other tools for building strength. Adding kettlebells, barbells, or dumbbells to a good body weight hinge is gonna just increase your strength a lot faster than sticking with body weight. For example, we have here a TRX, whereas a TRX can make the squat easier by allowing someone to have their hands on the handles and using the hands to lift them up if they don't quite have the leg strength to perform a bodyweight squat yet. It's helpful in that way, but it can't load it to make it tougher. Right? So depending on what your goals are with exercises, there may be different tools that are going to be beneficial. And that's kind of the point of what we're saying here is that body weight, we can make the body weight exercises of those tougher, but we can't make the body weight versions tougher on 2 legs until we add other implements. If we start talking about performing the exercise on only 1 leg at a time, then that's a way that we could make those body weight versions more challenging and more applicable to help improving strength. If we were to talk about upper body strength, then in a similar way to the lower body, again, like I said before, and I've harped on a lot already, we want to keep that strong pillar that we learned in the dead bug, the bridge, and the plank to allow a good platform to do these strong pushing and pulling movements. So of course, for body weight, the upper body push, the push up, is a common exercise for a reason. Like we said earlier, it's a moving plank. We teach that core and hips to stay tight while the arms move. Right. The push up is a great example of a good exercise done with body weight that we can adjust the proper challenge fairly easily. By determining the hand placement, we can make the exercise easier or harder. So if you were to put your hands on a wall and perform a push-up, for most people it would be too easy pretty quickly. But if we were to put your hands on, say, a kitchen counter or a desk, the closer that's going to make it harder. The closer we put your hands down to the floor, the tougher it's going to be. Right? So there are lots of progressions we can use to help people increase that upper body pushing exercise. And again, just to give you an idea of how choosing the proper tool for the right job is going to come into play, it's very, very tough to do an upper body pulling exercise with your body weight. So unless you're able to do something like a chin up or a pull up, which not many people are going to be able to get to right away, it's going to be tough to find ways to do pulling exercises with your body weight. You may need to add something like a barbell, kettlebell, dumbbell, TRX in order to keep getting the strength to be able to performing something like a chin up or a pull up. And again, this is where, just like the last slide, no tool is perfect, right? The TRX is going to make the pushing and pulling challenges very, very different. If we watch this video here, this is one of our wellness consultants performing a push-up variation, so an upper body push with the TRX cable. This is actually a very, very challenging exercise because rather than putting your hands on something like a kitchen counter, which is very stable, the TRX is moving. You have to be able to steady the handles while you're doing the pushing. So this exercise is actually not something we would do right away with a beginner. We would want to make sure that we pick something stable to have our hands in. So this is where the TRX is maybe not the best tool for learning initially, but a great way to challenge it. And what you're seeing here now is an even greater challenge. The hands are closer to the floor. We still have to be able to control the handles. So again, this is kind of how we can, for the experienced exerciser, to get that upper body pushing pattern, this would be a great way to do that. And again, you can see how even our consultant is shaking a little bit and struggling as he does that. Conversely, we have our TRX row. So the TRX is actually a fantastic tool for a body weight pulling exercise. So by placing our feet in different spots on the ground, we can use the upper body pulling motion in order to gain strength. What you're going to see our consultant do here right away is move her feet a little farther ahead to make the exercise tougher. So again, you can see just by the nature of this pulling type of exercise that this is going to be very hard to perform with your own body weight, right? So what we're seeing here, this TRX row, is a very good lead-in to eventually performing something like a chin-up or a pull-up, which would be a really, really good strength exercise involving only your body weight. Awesome. Good work. So the focus of today's topic was those 3 or 4 building block exercises using body weight that give you an idea of how you're going to be able to perform things long term that are going to keep increasing your strength challenge, right? As I've hopefully shown today, body weight could be the only tool you can use, or you can consider adding other tools to increase the difficulty or adding variety. I mentioned earlier that if you would like to stick with body weight and really kind of go deep on body weight strength exercises, there are many, many ways that we can do that. If you think of the push-up, right? If you get to a point where you can do a many push-ups from the floor, or if you can even elevate your feet with your hands on the floor and do push-ups, by moving to something like a one-arm push-up. A one-arm push-up would be a very, very, very advanced version of a push-up for someone who really wants to work hard on gaining strength, but wants to stick with body weight type of exercises. And just the nature of going from 2 arms to 1 arm is going to increase the challenge immensely, right? So again, there's lots of ways we can do that for different types of movements. The big thing is to focus on the patterns. And by the patterns, what I mean is that hinge pattern, that squat pattern, the upper body push, the upper body pull. If you want to stick with body weight, there's ways we can do that, or you can use different tools. Each tool is going to be a little bit different for each one, but no matter the type of implement you use, we can always fit it into that pattern. That's going to be, again, one of those really good strength building exercises for you as you continue in your fitness journey. So to bring it back, hopefully what you saw is that beginners, these 4 exercises I've shown you, which again was the breathing exercise, we had the dead bug, we had the bridge, and we had the plank. Those teach you some really good principles, like how to keep core stiffness, how to breathe, and how to move your body while creating stiffness. If you saw those other exercises, you can see how when we add a lot more moving parts, it can get more complex pretty quick. So by learning those initial exercises in a low-risk environment helps you create that foundation, helps give you the foundation to continue to move forward in a good way. And hopefully you can see that by spending some time practicing those can help reduce some uncertainty you may have with loaded exercises, and you may feel more confident doing so. And again, for our experienced individuals, by revisiting those basics, maybe you may find that you're not getting quite as much core stiffness as you thought. So if you can use these exercises to shore up on that core stiffness by inserting it into your warm-up, it can allow you to be stronger in your other exercises. And you may again find that you want to go deep into some body weight strength exercises and really challenge yourself with that 1-arm push-up, or even like a 1-leg squat. We would call that a pistol squat, would be a very, very challenging body weight exercise for the lower body. So again, hopefully we all learned a little bit there. Speaking of learning, what is the best way to learn? Hopefully you would want to speak to a qualified professional, because again, remember that fitness goes a long way in terms of improving your health. Besides that, having a good teacher can save you time, energy, and a lot of money later on, right? We always want to learn the basics first. If we can give ourselves the best foundation to do so, then that's going to set us up for long-term success, and that's exactly what a coach does, right? A coach should make you do the things you don't like or you avoid, because they know that it's going to be beneficial for you, and they can tell if you need that type of thing, right? So in Canada, if you're looking for someone to speak to about exercise, our governing body is called the Canadian Society of Exercise Physiology, so CSEP for short. And in order for someone to become certified with CSEP and be a certified personal trainer, it requires a minimum of 60 credit hours of university, as well as then getting your 4-year degree in kinesiology or a 3-year degree. And then you have to challenge an exam. There's 2 designations as far as CSEP goes. So if you're looking for someone to help teach you exercise, if you see in their credentials a CSEP-CEP, that means that that person is qualified to work with healthy populations. If you're someone who has a chronic condition or chronic disease, then you might want to look for the letter CEP after the CSEP. What that means is that that individual has gone through some further testing, that they've had to prove that they understand how things like medications affect exercise, and how to work with people with, say, heart conditions or lung conditions, or any other, like diabetes, any other type of chronic condition. If you talk to someone and you don't see those letters behind their name, that may mean that they have not had the education that the people who are certified do have. So as with anything, again, you want to make sure that whoever you're working with has proven that they understand the concepts, know how to work with people, and can get you started in the best possible way. At this point, we'd like to welcome any questions. I'm going to hand it back off to Karen here for a moment, and then we will be back if you have any questions. Thank you for listening.
Well, thanks, Wes. That was great. We have one question, and the first question that someone is here asking is, how do I know if I'm feeling the exercise in the right spot? Wes?
Okay, awesome. So this is a really good question. So a common thing I hear from a lot of people is am I doing this properly? Am I feeling it in the right spot? How do I know if I'm doing this correctly, right? And the answer is using your own body can be a great way. So for example, if we talk about that dead bug, the main thing that we wanted to focus on in that dead bug exercise was, are we creating core stiffness? So by taking one hand and putting it on your belly, you can, as you're doing the movement with the arm and or your leg, what you can do is take your hand, push into your belly, and you can feel if your core is stiff or not. Alternatively, another common way that we could do that for the dead bug exercise is we would take one hand and we would put it just underneath our low back. So as you perform the exercise, if you feel your lower back lift away from your hand, so your low back or your belly button lifting toward the ceiling, that would insinuate that you're not keeping that core stiffness and we're not able to keep the core tight. So using that way is a great way to do it. And again, if you talk to an exercise professional, they can show you different ways to make sure that you are feeling the proper things on your own. For those of you who may be members of the Wellness Institute, one of the good things that we have here is that we have our wellness consultants, so our exercise specialists, out on the gym floor at all times. So for our members, they can stop our consultants as they're walking around helping people at any point and say, hey, you know what, can you just watch me do this exercise? I want to make sure I'm doing it properly. And that's what we have people on the floor at all times for, right? Another question that we've just got here is, how long should I spend on these exercises each day? So also a very good question here. With some of these exercises, I've given some examples of how many sets, how many reps to do. Again, a common one would be 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps. If you're doing these 4 exercises, the breathing, the dead bug, if you're doing the bridge, if you're doing the plank, shouldn't take much more than 10 to 15 minutes to perform those. I will note that the plank is a little bit different because we're holding that exercise rather than counting repetitions. We would probably just count in terms of number of seconds held. So that one really wouldn't fit in under the 8 to 12 rep recommendation range. We would probably even, majority of the time I would start someone with 5 reps of a 5-second hold. So that would be a little bit less reps because we're holding it compared to the other exercises where there is no hold. So another question, is there a resource we can see the examples of these exercises? So the answer to that would definitely be yes. This webinar is going to be posted later on for anybody to see. You can access it online on the Wellness Institute at any point. Oh, and one other question here I see we have. So a question here is, progressing body weight is not as simple as adding more weight to make it harder. How can I make the exercises more difficult? So with that one, again, very good question. With the dead bug exercise, I had shown 3 different variations in the video where there was one with just a leg going out, one with just an arm going out, and one with the arm and leg going out. With the push-up, we had talked about having the hands on a different object. So whether it's the wall, whether it's a desk, whether it's the floor, body weight is a little bit trickier. This person is right, because rather than simply adding 5 more pounds to the exercise, you have to manipulate your body in a certain way. So with that one, again, although it is a little bit tougher, we always have some resources here at the Wellness that we can help do that. But oftentimes it's going to be dependent on the exercise, and it's going to be much more about manipulating how your body is rather than adding weight. Because again, we can't quite do that one with body weight, so we have to be a little fancier.
Well, I think unless we have any other questions come through at this point, I think I'm just going to extend right now a big thanks to Wes for sharing all his knowledge and expertise. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions that weren't addressed today, please feel free to contact us, and we'll be happy to answer them at a later point. We really hope that you've enjoyed our session and found it to be informative and helpful. I know I have. This webinar has been recorded, so you will be sent the link. So if you want to watch it again or share it with a friend perhaps, we encourage you to do so. Again, our apologies for the little bit of the glitch at the outset. So hopefully you were able to hang on and listen to the rest of our webinar. We have another webinar coming up. The one will be on nutritional needs of older adults in early October, on October 2nd, with our registered dietitian. So we hope you can join us for that one too. Keep posted for other upcoming webinars after this one. And again, thanks so much for joining us, and a big thanks to Wes Pomarensky. Appreciated the information sharing today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.